I think we're about ready to start. So let's all take a seat. Everybody up here mic'd up? Yep. Okay.
On.
All right, so this is the Mets uniform panel of the Queens Baseball Convention. My name is Paul Lukas. I write about uniforms for ESPN.com, and I also run the website UniWatch, and I am also a lifelong Mets fan. So sharing a uniform panel about the Mets is sort of like the perfect sweet spot for who I am. Thanks for everyone for coming out. And I want to introduce the panel. To my right is my right-hand man and my good friend, UniWatch deputy editor, my bench coach, if you will, Phil Hecken. To his right is Russ Gompers, who just hit his 25-year anniversary of being the official stitcher of the New York Mets. And is also, he's sort of sleeping with the enemy because he's also the official stitcher of the Yankees for the last year.
Just happened.
To his right is John Springer, who is the author of the book Mets by the Numbers and runs the website of the same name, and is the foremost authority on all matters regarding Mets uniform numbers. To his right is Todd Todd, who is one of the foremost sports graphic designers working in America today, the man behind many pro uniforms and logos that you see on the field. He's often not allowed to say which ones, but I will say that the Anaheim Angels uniform is something he designed. He has designed Super Bowl logos and a lot more. So Todd Todd. And to his right, at the far end of the table, is Nick DeSalvo, one of the foremost collectors of game-used Mets jerseys, who's going to have a show and tell of all kinds of game-used paraphernalia and memorabilia from his collection. So we have a lot to talk about. My name again is Paul Lukas, and I want to start by telling you something that maybe you know, maybe you don't, but the Mets have some very small uniform changes coming this season. One involves this cap, which a gentleman named, was it Brian? Brian, a gentleman in the crowd, was kind enough to loan to me. This is his cap. This is the retail version, the replica version of the alternate cap that the Mets wear with their home alternate blue jersey. It has the orange brim and the white outline logo. Starting this season, this cap will no longer have an orange brim. It will be a solid blue cap, and the only difference from this cap and the basic standard primary cap that so many people in this room are wearing is that it will still have the white outline on the logo. So that is going to be the new alternate home cap. So I want to do a quick show of hands in the room, and don't raise your hands until I tell you what all the choices are. First choice is, how many prefer this as the alternate cap? Did I not just say? Do not. Second choice is, how many like the, I thought there would be somebody walking around with the new cap. Nobody seems to have purchased it yet. But so the idea of the same cap with a blue brim, who likes that better? The third choice is, who doesn't think the Mets really need any alternate cap? Just stick with the basic one. And then the fourth choice is, who would like to see the new version, a blue brim with the white outline, and see that become the primary cap to replace the standard primary cap? So let's go one at a time. Who in the room likes this as the alternate cap? Who in the room likes the idea, if you haven't seen it yet, of the same cap with a blue brim as the alternate cap? Not that many people. How many people in the room think the Mets don't really need an alternate cap? And how many people think that the new alternate cap, basically the same thing as the current primary, but with a white outline on the logo, how many people think that should become the primary cap? Okay, so basically not a lot of love for alternate caps in general in this room. The road alternate cap, which has a gray outline on the logo, that is staying the same. Right. Right. Some other changes that the Mets are making this year, small changes. Both of the blue alternate jerseys, the home and the road, which had a Mr. Met sleeve patch, that is changing to the standard Mets Skyline logo sleeve patch. Let's again do a show of hands. How many people like that change? Like the idea of having the Skyline logo on the blue alternate jerseys? How many like having Mr. Met as the sky? A little more love from Mr. Met. So And how many people are going to buy another jersey just because they changed the sleeve patch? A decent number of people. So those are two of the changes the Mets are making this year. A third change is, I don't think this has been officially announced, and so you didn't hear it from me, but I don't mind saying it in this room, that and it's not really a surprise, that the 1986 throwback, which was worn last year on Sundays as a 30th anniversary gesture to the 86 World Series team, that will not be worn again this year. That was a one-year thing. 30th anniversary of the championship team.
Military camouflage?
Question. Well, we will have a Q&A, but somebody just asked if they'll have the military camouflage. They'll be wearing the military camouflage on Memorial Day like everybody else, but they're not going to have their own separate camouflage alternate like they did a few years ago. All right, so those are the basics going in to 2017 for the Mets. And we're going to look back on 2016 and some things that happened and some stories. And I'm going to start with my right-hand man, who's at my right, Phil Hecken, who is a uni-tracker. Phil tracks the Mets' record in various uniform combinations. What is their record with this cap? What is their record with that jersey? And most specifically, this is the one I find most interesting, what is their record when Yoenis Cespedes does or doesn't wear the neon compression sleeve? And how does Cespedes himself perform when he wears this? So Phil, take it away and give us that data.
Is this okay? It works. Thank you, Paul. Thanks. Great introduction. As Paul mentioned, I do uni-tracking for the Mets. I've done this basically since I think '08, and in 2015 when we had this. Last year we were snowed out. I went over a few years. This year I'm just going to go over the 2016 uniforms. As everybody knows, the Mets made the playoffs as a wild card team, so they were successful with an 87-75 record. But in what uniform or uniforms were they more or less successful? They wore the pinstripes at home a lot, as we know, and they were 34. I need my glasses. 34 and 26, so they did pretty well in those. They didn't do as well in the Royal homes. I'll get back to that, the Royal alternate jersey. And then in the 86 throwbacks, which Paul mentioned, they wore all those on all Sundays except for, I believe it was Mother's Day and Father's Day. And I think one other
Memorial Day.
Right, but they did have a weekend where they lauded the 86 team. So they ended up wearing those a total of 14 times, and they went 8-6, 86. How prophetic. In their road gray, which I happen to, Jay right in the front row is wearing it, I happen to think it's one of the best looking road uniforms in all of baseball, 40 and 30, and then they wore the Royal road top. As you know, they have, because you can't just have the one blue, we have to have two blue tops, and that has the silver lettering, it says New York. I'll get back to their record in that in a second because it's interesting. They had a few special uniforms. They wore the 42 road gray for Jackie Robinson Day. They won Mother's Day, which Russ right here is wearing a copy of it. That was, oh no, wait, I have it as that they were on the road. Anyway, they won that day. They were on the road. Okay, so this is year before. That's why. And that was a special uniform. Father's Day, they, of course, broke out a special top this year for the first time, the powder blue with pinstripes, powder blue lettering, and they lost in that. And then they wore, interestingly enough, that I think people might not know this uniform too well because they always wear it on the road, and I happen to like it. It's called it's a throwback to the Negro Leagues, the Royal Giants. Anybody remember that? It's all blue with the blue pants. And actually that day, the first day, set a new Mets uniform modification, if you will. And I don't know if I'll be able to do this.
A milestone.
Try to stand up. James Loney, our one-year rental first baseman, broke out a combination, I don't know if anybody can see it, with orange sanitaries and blue stirrups. No Met had ever worn this before. He actually did it twice. So that was a new thing. Independence Day, they wore pins in one with the special red, white, and blue. And they wore the 1986 road throwbacks. This was a one-day thing that MLB did this year. I think eight teams participated in 4 games where they were all wearing kind of just throwback uniforms of some sort. Mets wore the 86 throwbacks, and they lost in the road throwbacks. A couple of the interesting little facts quickly. Matt Harvey likes to wear, as we all know, the blue alternate, and the reason I held off on doing it, the Mets, except for the Royal Giants, which is technically not their road or home alternate, they were winless. 0-11 wearing the blue tops this past year. They did not win a single game. So maybe they can just, I don't know. You think they can drop it? So anyway, but Matt Harvey was one of the primary culprits. He liked to wear that. He was winless at home, winless on the road. He was winless in the '86 throwbacks.
Matt Harvey was winless in a lot of jerseys.
Yeah, well,
last year.
games where the Mets where he started, not necessarily that he got a decision. They were 7-10. So everybody thinks Matt Harvey is the second coming. Maybe not so much.
Harvey also, if I'm not mistaken, got the starting assignment on both Mother's Day and Father's Day.
Yes.
So he couldn't wear the blue jersey those days, even if he had wanted to.
Yes, Memorial Day, Independence Day, and Mother's Day. Three of them. Yes, Memorial Day as well. So that's that. And then finally, the information that you all, or Paul alluded to, is the Cespedes sleeve tracker.
Is there anyone in the room who does not know what we're talking about when we say Jonas Cespedes' neon compression sleeve? All right, everybody knows.
Yeah.
But I myself have never been. Oh, and here it is.
Sometimes he wears it on the right arm, and I have the records for this. And sometimes he wears it.
Oh, people, you gotta love a panelist. You gotta love a panelist who serves as his own visual aid. It's interesting you say sometimes he wears it on the right, sometimes on the left. I have never been able to figure out a pattern for it.
There is none.
Not about which arm he uses it on, what day game, night game, whether he goes high cuffed or low cuffed when he has the sleeve. I mean, it's a rare thing in sports, someone who is truly random.
It is the most random thing. There is no rhyme or reason. He's worn them with all the combinations, both home, road, the alternates, the 86s. He wore it on Independence Day. High cuffed, he wears it. Pajama pants, where he doesn't cuff his pants nicely and show his socks or stirrups, God forbid.
Now, he's never worn two of them like you're wearing,
he
right?
has never worn, and he favors the right arm for some reason. I don't know that there's a medical reason for this. I just think it's super, and this all started, I don't know if anybody knows the full story back in, I think it was 2015 in that August run when they picked him up and there was that parakeet thing and everybody said it looks like the parakeet. So, and I guess they won that day, so maybe he thought it was lucky. Well, when he wears the neon yellow compression sleeve, the Mets are 22-17. So 5 games over 500, not bad. When he wears it on the right sleeve, he favors the left, 2-5. When he wears it on the left, 20-12. So they're 8 over 500. So we need, anytime you see him wearing it on the left sleeve, we might have a chance of winning. Pinstripes, 9-6. Road grays, 10-7. Of course, the Mets didn't win any games when they wear their blue jersey, so 0-2 and 0-1. 86 throwbacks, 2 wins and a loss. 1 on Independence Day when he wore it. When he goes high cuffed, 10-8, and when he wears the low pants, the pajama pants, 12-9. So there's no rhyme or reason, and there's no pattern to how the Mets do when he wears it. And I do have, I'm not even going to bother. If anybody's interested after, I can tell you how he personally did when he wears it.
That was my next question.
All right.
Just don't go too deep into the numbers. Just in general, does he perform better or worse?
I just want to see if I have a total because I'm not going to add them all up in my head. Batted, let's see, 270. With sleeves, batted 317, and with either arm, 242 without. So he does do better, at least average-wise, when he's wearing the compression sleeve.
All
so
right.
let's all hope we see a lot of Yo in neon orange this year.
Let's just hope we see him, period, this year.
So, thank you, Paul.
No injuries and healthy season. Great report, great data crunching. Russ, you are less about hard data and more about storytelling.
I really think Phil needs to be doing other things with his time. But
Phil thinks so too.
anyway, I really would just like to introduce a family that is sitting back there. They're the Remus family. I've known them forever. Mrs. Remus, this family, a husband, wife, daughter, son, they sat right behind home plate at Shea Stadium, right next to the lady that did this all the time. And the son, who's 30 years old now, he's back there. I remember doing a shirt for him. They sat in seat X7A. And on his shirt, I did Remus X7A. And I just want to acknowledge them because they've been Met fans forever.
So Russ's job as the Mets official stitcher, he puts the letters and the numbers on the jerseys, but it gets especially interesting when the Mets make a trade or if they call up a player from the minors. And a lot of times that's done on very short notice, and Russ has to kind of spring into action and create a uniform on the spot. And so what happened this past year when the Mets acquired Jay Bruce?
Well, the story about that is I was actually in Cooperstown playing baseball. I go every year for a week to play. And the whole team was in the house, and half of us were eating in the kitchen and half were watching the game. The Mets were playing the Yankees. And Matt Gelb comes on the sideline, reporter, and he says, so the Mets just got Jay Bruce, and so what happens is Kevin Kearse, the equipment manager, has to call the Cincinnati Reds equipment manager, find out what size pants he is, what size shirt he is, his hat size, all the stuff, shoes, everything. He says, once we gather that information, we take a 10-minute drive over to a place in Whitestone called Stitches, and they stitch it up. So I got a really nice plug out of that on SNY. I mean, that was Mets and Yankees. So a lot of people saw that.
And then what happened? Like, you were up in Cooperstown playing ball. Who made Jay Bruce's uniform?
I called in and we had it done.
No, okay. So you're a big picture guy. You can be away from.
I can be away.
Yeah. So you call your people. You make sure it gets done.
Got it done. No problem.
Yeah. In something like that, do you trust that it gets done right? Do they have to send you a photo?
No. My nephew actually is the guy that places the numbers and the letters on, and he's perfect, except for when the Mets got Piazza. They were like, my whole crew was like afraid to touch that jersey. And I was actually on the road doing something. They called me, Russ, the Mets just got Piazza. What should we do? I said, all right, I'll be right back. So I came back and I actually did that one myself. That's true.
Now you've been involved with a lot of other like special patches, special embroidery, things like that for the Mets over the years. You were telling me earlier on a situation with Bobby Valentine with some special embroidery you did for him.
Well, I mean, you know, like when Tug McGraw died, we did the thing that said, you gotta believe. When Bob Murphy died, we did that.
Which is interesting because a lot of teams will do a patch,
right.
But the Mets have on several occasions
right over the logo.
You've done the embroidery like right onto the fabric,
right.
not as a patch. So you did that for Bob Murphy when you did the Bob Murphy thing, and you did it for the 9/11.
Right. So what happened with 9/11? I'm going to talk about Bobby V for a minute because I'm glad he's going to be here today. In 2000, I was fortunate enough to go to Japan when the Mets opened up the season against the Cubs. And, I mean, that was one of the best experiences of my life. I don't know if I'd ever want to do it again. I mean, I literally cleaned these guys' shoes and whatever. But it was just an amazing week, and I really got to know Bobby really well. He's just a regular guy. He really is. He was great. But then right after 9/11, they came to me and they said, Russ, we want to do something to commemorate 9/11 on the sleeve. So they brought me his jersey, and then it's hanging up in my office. I have it framed now because he signed it for me also. They gave me his jersey. I came up with 3 different 9/11 logos, and they ultimately went with the bottom one that's on that shirt. And then I had to do that for every uniform.
For those who aren't familiar, with it, it says 9/11/01 and American flags on each side, right?
Right.
It's very understated. It's very classy.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a great guy, Bobby. I'll tell you one more story about him. In 2000, when the Mets clinched, I was in the locker room. I stayed back. The whole team was in the midst, screaming, going crazy. And once that was done, Bobby V came out of the middle, was going back into his office, and he passed me. I'm right here. I said, Bobby, congratulations. And he said to me, Russ, thank you so much. You're part of this team. And that made me feel great. I mean, he's a really regular guy. He's a great guy.
There's always been these rumblings, you know, whenever the Mets aren't doing well or whatever, there's always some section of the fan base that says, bring back Bobby V. You think that'll ever happen?
No, it won't happen.
No. Did you ever think it would happen?
No, I mean, I just think he was a great manager. I really do. But, you know, he's a New Yorker, and he does his New York thing, and sometimes it's a little over the top.
Yep. So speaking of embroidery, another change that's coming this year, not just for the Mets, but for all Major League Baseball teams, is that the basic game cap, whether it's the classic blue one, or the alternate, or the road alternate, or the camouflage one for Memorial Day, any of them, they're all going to have, starting this year, the new era logo. Bring that up here. So the Mets are one of the few teams who have already worn this because it started in the postseason this past year. If you watched any of the postseason, the World Series, the playoffs, any of it, the new era logo is now appearing on all game caps, and that's a new thing. All teams will do with it starting this season. And how does the room feel about that? Don't raise your hands yet. We're going to ask who likes it, who doesn't like it, and who doesn't really care, like who's indifferent. So who likes the idea of adding the new era logo to the game caps? Crickets. Who does not like the idea? Most of the room. And who doesn't care? Who sort of sees it as not a big deal, one way or the other? A decent number of people in the room. Okay. Now, Russ, you're not involved in any of that because the caps come that way.
Comes from New Era. That's why it's on it.
Right. But they didn't give you like old caps and say like, here, add the new era logo to these so we can reuse them or something like that. All right. So that's something. And for those who haven't heard, a few years down the road in 2020, so that's still several seasons away. Under Armour is going to be taking over from Majestic as Major League Baseball's official uniform outfitter. And every team starting in 2020 will have the Under Armour logo, not on the sleeve, which is where the Majestic logo has been, but on the upper chest. Every team is going to have that.
Get out of it.
Somebody in the crowd is saying the Yankees will somehow get out of it. The word I'm hearing is that they will not get out of it, is that it's going to be everybody.
Well, I got a question. What about two-tone logos?
What about two-tone logos?
Whoever does that in their caps already. So what about two-tone logos for those teams to really match up? If you're going to have a logo on it, instead of just a white or an orange or...
I have not seen any two-tone versions of the new era logo. The only ones I have seen have all been one color.
Better? I mean, if it has to be on there.
There's no good from my perspective, there's no good version of it. But we'll get to more crowd questions soon. Russ, you got any other stories you want to tell?
I'll tell you one quick one. Like when the Mets make a trade. So a few years ago...
you are often one of the first people to know.
Yeah.
You often know, like, before some other team personnel know.
Well, here's what happened this particular night. I'll never forget. It was a Friday night, I think. And I'm watching the Met game at home, and I hear that the Mets just reacquired Greg McMichael. They had him, they traded him, they were getting him back. So I said, oh my God, let me call Charlie now. Charlie Samuels, equipment manager at the time. I said, let me call him now. Let me drive to Shea now, pick up the shirt now, so I don't have to kill my whole Saturday. I'll get it now, I'll do it Saturday morning, boom, no problem. So I call Charlie, he says, okay, I'll get everything together, come on over. So I get in my car, I drive over, I get pulled over by a cop. I said, oh, you know, I'm going to Shea, I do the uniforms for the Mets. I think he's a Met fan. The guy didn't know a thing about baseball. That's the guy that stopped me. Anyway, I didn't get a ticket, so I'm on my way, and the Mets are winning that game by like 5 runs at the time. It was the 8th inning. As I get, and I live in Bayside, so it's a 10-minute ride. And as I'm getting closer to Shea, it's like now they're winning by. Now it's getting closer. Now they're winning by 2. Now by 1, and all of a sudden they're losing. And I walk into the stadium and I see Charlie, and I said, oh my God, Charlie, you see what's happening here? He goes, what do you mean? Because he was getting the uniforms, he didn't know. I said, we're losing. He goes, what? He goes, did Johnny Franco blow the game? I go, yeah. He goes, oh my God, we can't go in this way. We have to go in this way because Johnny's going to destruct the clubhouse. And all of a sudden, I mean, literally there was shit flying all over the place. So that was that night. That was pretty cool.
All right. Let's move one spot down on the table to John Springer. Now, John, you crunch all kinds of numbers, like who has worn a certain Mets uniform number the most, who's worn it the least, who's worn it, changed their number to 1 and then changed back. Were there any particularly notable numerological happenings on the Mets in 2016?
There were quite a few. We'll begin by saying Josh Smoker. Anybody know what's significant about Josh Smoker?
3 numbers.
3 numbers. First guy since 1963, Roger Craig, to wear 3 different numbers in a season.
Can everyone hear John?
Is my mic on? I'm sorry.
Is John? Yeah, John.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. So Josh Smoker became the first player since Roger Craig in 1963 to be issued 3 different uniform numbers, although only 2 of them got into games. The situation with that was that he was issued number 49 when he first came up. He came up as the 26th man in the doubleheader rule. Wasn't used that day. They subsequently reacquired John Neese, who took his 49 back. When Smoker came back, they gave him 59. The Mets subsequently acquired Fernando Salas, who had a lot of equity in 59 where he'd played. So Smoker wound up in 58. So 3 numbers for Josh Smoker. That's 1.
So that's in one season. That's
in one season, yeah.
Has any Met ever worn 4 in one season?
No. So that's the record right now. It's a shared record. Bartolo Colon became the all-time leader in wins and strikeouts among guys who wore number 40. Can you tell me who he surpassed?
For the Mets, you mean?
Pat Zachary, that's right. All right. It was a bad season for Matt Harvey. He still became the all-time leader in strikeouts among number 33s. Who did he surpass?
Ray Sadecki.
No. Remember the Maine. John Maine. Another record here, Jacob deGrom among number 48s. He's already the all-time leader in hits among guys who wore number 48. This year he became the biggest winner and strikeout champion among guys who wore 48. Whose record in those latter 2 categories did he pass? Anybody?
Aaron Heilman.
Aaron Heilman, correct. Let's see. In among the numbers themselves, we saw another unusual. This is really a battle that's been going on for the better part of 20 years between most home runs ever accumulated by a single uniform number. And that's gone back and forth between number 5 and number 20, going back, like I said, probably close to 20 years. We ended this year with number 20 back in front of number 5, thanks to Neil Walker outperforming David Wright this year. I think it's a 4 home run lead. So we'll watch that this coming year. The other thing that I'd say is kind of interesting in the uniform number world is that, when I was here 2 years ago, we talked about, the accumulation of high uniform numbers that have kind of come into the atmosphere among the Mets.
Spring
over
training
the last
type
recent
numbers.
years. Yeah, exactly. Guys in the 50s, 60s, 70s is not unusual anymore. And, I theorized at the time that maybe this was the Mets kind of recognizing that, relief pitchers are their own sort of, category of pitchers, and maybe they deserve numbers that are a little bit higher. I'm trying to make some sense of it, but really, as time's gone on, that theory really hasn't held water. Right now we're seeing coaches wearing 20s and reserve infielders wearing numbers in the 50s, and to me it doesn't make a lot of sense. One of the upshots of that is the other thing. I think there were 7 or 8 different games this year where the starting lineup for the Mets combined uniform numbers were the highest ever. So there were all 7 of the highest combined uniform numbers games ever.
So they kept breaking the record?
Yeah, they kept breaking their records.
You better watch it, or Russ is going to tell you should be doing something else with your time.
I know it. September 18th versus the Twins, the Mets had a combined uniform total of 324. Thanks very much to Cespedes, 52, Johnson, and Rivera, 54, in the starting lineup, in number 63, Gabriel Ynoa, as the starting pitcher. I would say, as sort of an advocacy thing, I think the Mets kind of are missing some opportunities to kind of put guys in appropriate numbers. TJ Rivera is a good example, came up, issued number 54. At the time he came up, number 2 was sort of unissued. Dilson Herrera, I guess, he had already been traded. So, yeah, the number was available. Rivera was a guy who went to college and was coached by Mackey Sasser. He was a great guy to put in number 2. And they kind of missed that opportunity, And so I'm advocating this year, let's take Gesellman at 65 and Lugo at 67, get them down into the 30s. I would actually, advocate that you could move Gesellman and, say, Jacob deGrom to 35 and 36, respectively. You'd have 5 starting pitchers in consecutive numbers. That would be something that would be historic in Mets history. And so that's sort of where I am with, where the uniform numbers are now. There's a lot of opportunities to kind of move these high guys down now. There's been a lot of guys, Tim Tuffle, who was here earlier today, is kind of given up number 11. I'm going to suggest that Ty Kelly is a good match for that. The 2 L's and 11, they kind of match together.
I just want to say, sometimes people hear what I do for a living. I say I write about uniforms, and they say, man, that's really specific. And I say, you should meet my friend John.
I say that I'm a perfectly normal Mets fan, other than this one thing that I've sort of
I meant it admiringly.
Checked out through my life. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the uniform number atmosphere today.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Moving down the table to Todd. Todd, I had a specific question. Todd is aside from just a great graphic designer, he's very involved with sports branding, high concept branding. He's involved with this new 3-on-3 basketball league. Would you say every day you talk to Ice Cube?
I do. We communicate literally.
Ice Cube runs this new 3-on-3
25 times a day, phone, email, or text.
So one thing I've noticed about the Mets, and most people in the room probably have as well, that they're still wearing their same basic script, and whenever they've veered away from their core look, like in the 80s, they went to the racing stripes and pullovers. Pullovers were even in the 70s. But then they came back to the, basic button front jersey. And then in the 90s and in the 2000s, they started adding all the black jerseys, the black caps, the black drop shadows. But then they got rid of it and they came back. And even what I opened this session with when I talked about the alternate cap with the orange brim and the white outline logo, well, they're dialing that back. They've gotten rid of the orange brim, and now it has the standard blue brim. And it seems like the Mets, when they stray away from their core, as marketers like to say, they ultimately always come back. And so what is left for a team like the Mets? Can they tinker with their look? Should they tinker with it? And maybe they should just leave well enough alone, or from a branding standpoint. And people often think of branding as something that should constantly be in flux, and for some brands it is. But for many brands it stays the same. And what is the right thing given the history and heritage of the Mets and the sort of box they've almost painted themselves into by the way they always come back?
Well, it's an interesting question. In sports, changes the likes of which, blowing it up, not painting around the edges, but blowing it up, generally occur for 2 reasons. Number 1, there's been this down era that you want to break free from. That's happened with the Mets, right? No. Or there's been a wholesale change of ownership, and this new owner wants to impart their stink on the look of the franchise, right? That has, it's been a long time. Let's just put it that way. In the case of the Mets, I think 2 things. Okay, number 1, just by having witnessed the reaction of this room to the most subtle of changes, which are really kind of meaningless. This is a fan base that demands consistency and that harkens back to it's all about the orange and blue and it's all about the skyline. If you make a change, you have to know what a reaction might be. And in this case, I think ownership is smart enough, and marketing folks, that there would be maybe a little bit of a revolution that would occur. Number 2, we're talking about the Mets. Some team names lend themselves to easy imagery, okay? If you are the Boston Bruins and you really wanted to make a change, well, there are all kinds of bare things you can do. If you're the Cardinals, one bird, and not that they would ever do it, a bird is a bird. For the Mets, it really doesn't, what is a Met, right?
And they sort of tried with the Mr. Met sleeve patch, and they even went away from that now.
Well, and interestingly, I thought it was an interesting reaction here too. The Mr. Met sleeve patch seems to be pretty well received, but that to me represents a painting around the edges. Mr. Met has been part of the visual DNA of this franchise since almost the very beginning.
Second
so
season.
you can mess with the core. And by the way, Paul, you didn't even mention the Al Harrison 1993-94 Mets with the tail sweep.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Which, even though it's a subtle departure, it really historically represents this revolution for this particular franchise. So, to kind of come back to the...
Some of us have tried to forget those 2 seasons.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was, I mean, and one of those seasons was not a complete season. 94, we had our season interrupted. So I think the answer to the question is no, the Mets should not stray too far away. There's no reason to, and there's a lot of goodwill attached to what they currently have. And just one more quick thing. A couple of years ago, just as a fun experiment, not proposing anything radical, I kind of thought of the fact that the New York skyline has changed significantly since 1962. And certainly in the last few years, we've seen wholesale changes of what the city of New York looks like visually. So I kind of messed around with it. I put it on my blog, on my website, and boy, did people just chew my ass apart. You can't put the High Line there. That's the Whitestone Bridge. It's not the Whitestone Bridge. It is a generic East River Bridge. Well, why would you take the Empire State Building out? Whoa, 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 back off, No. So,
is it hard? Last quick question. At a time when people are sort of accustomed to a lot of changes in the uniform world and in the visual marketing world in general, where there seems to be more of a short attention span mentality, is it hard to hold the line and say we're just going to stick with what we have?
Well, first of all, I think that everyone in this room would understand the fact that people hate change, and especially on social media.
I can tell you, writing about uniforms, a lot of fans love change and say, it's been 10 minutes. Where's the next change? Come on.
And they turned 8.
Think about the LA Chargers, whatever that was that they put out there, and think of how that was savaged. And I'm not saying rightfully, wrongfully. I think there were some very valid points. But, there was a misfire in terms of communication when this thing was released into the world, what it was supposed to be.
It was also accompanied by a move, which is always an unpopular thing.
Yes, there's bad will attached to that to begin with. But for the most part, people just beat the crap out of it because it was something different. And it was not articulated.
So it's easier and safer in some ways to stay with what you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we could point out a couple of 2 quick examples, okay? This past year in the NBA, the Sacramento Kings introduced a new identity, which, had some glommed onto what they had several years ago, a long time ago, and it was classy and it was very well received. They came up with a very defined reason why they did it. And, the flip side of that would be in MLB, the Miami Marlins, several years ago, put out a look that was pretty, I think, untraditional. Now, was that wrong for a baseball team in Miami, which has undergone all sorts of changes, changing from the Florida Marlins to the Miami Marlins? Okay, it kind of looks like a transit logo of some sort. It's very bright. It's a little bit different. People beat the crap out of that. It's kind of become comfortable. People stopped caring, even though the team has not won in the interval, since they introduced it.
All right. To Todd's right is Nick DeSalvo, who's going to do a little show and tell with some of the items from his game-used jersey collection. And when Nick is done, we're going to do some Q&A. Does anyone know, is anyone coming into this room after us? Is there another panel? Do we have a little time? Can we go, Shannon, we can go 10 minutes late, 15 minutes? Okay. So I know at least 2 of us also have to run outside and feed the parking meter. So forgive us while Phil and I do that in a minute or 2. And Nick, take it away.
All right, everybody. Just a little brief introduction. I did the panel 2 years ago and introduced myself as a site administrator of Game Used Universe, which is the premier game used collecting hobby website. And also I've been a Mets collector for the last 25 or so years, building a collection of mainly jerseys and bats from players from my own childhood and my own growing up in this area. So what I thought would be good is a little uniform history. We've touched on a couple of things during the show today. one, the blue alternates, and two, the 86 throwback style, the racing stripes. And I have a little bit of a history of how these jerseys have evolved over time. But I'm going to need to be hands-free, so I thought maybe it'd be best to have a volunteer from the audience to assist and sort of hold the jerseys while I speak about them. How about this young man over here in the nice-looking Steven Matz jersey? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, slight confession. This is my son, Nicky. So as you're aware, the Mets revived the 86 throwback style this year in their 30th anniversary. I've brought along a copy of this jersey. I'll show the back. And this jersey was worn throughout the season by our shortstop, Asdrubal Cabrera. Now, if you're familiar with what the jersey used to look like, it obviously wasn't made of this flex-based material with this white, funny-looking panel on the bottom and this mesh-style nameplate. The jersey, unfortunately, has adopted sort of the new technology, but it looked nice when worn on the field, albeit it was a bit baggy on most guys. Despite the shortcomings of this one, the Mets had a ceremony where they invited back a lot of the former 86 heroes. And those guys, in a ceremony before the game, wore similar jerseys on field for the ceremony. Now, this one in particular was worn by pitcher Rick Aguilera. If you notice, no diaper panel, correct nameplate, and it's kind of odd. They got it right for the returning heroes that wore these for all of about 15 minutes, but the team themselves, unfortunately, wore those abominations for the most of the season. In 2006, Majestic did the same thing. This was actually a spare. Gary Carter didn't wear this. If he did wear this, it probably wouldn't have come out of the house today. But interestingly enough, Majestic put their logos right here underneath the 62-86, the 25th anniversary logo. This year, they did their logo in dark blue and they put it off to the side. Looks a little bit odd, but if anyone has seen any spare of these, they can differentiate the current with the old. So when these jerseys first came about, in 1983, the Mets introduced this brand new style. It was a V-neck, something a bit revolutionary. Had these 3 stripes on the side, also down the pants. Names on the backs like the jerseys had started adopting the past few years. And this flat style blue twill letters, which you've seen reappear very recently. This one was worn by then coach Bobby Valentine. The Mets wore this style from 1983 through 85. It is kind of easy to differentiate these jerseys from anything else, to determine who wore them, what year they wore them, because of the tagging in the neckline. If you show the front here, these jerseys showed player number that wore the jersey, size, and the set of the jersey manufactured by Rawlings at the time. Why I'm pointing this out is in 1986, the Mets changed manufacturers. They brought in Goodman and Sons to do the 86 jerseys. And these jerseys, although they look very much the same, there's no differentiating factors in any of these jerseys to say who wore them, what year, etc. Goodman put a little tag on the bottom, and that was all they did. Which was kind of a shame, because the 86 jerseys are the most historic of this era, and the very least able to be authenticated out of all the batch.
I'm going to interrupt for a second and ask, Russ, do you do anything with any of the jerseys where you add any kind of mark indicating who wore it, what set it was, or anything like that? And in terms of working with a different manufacturer, whether it was Majestic or Under Armour coming up, or in the past, were you on board when they still had Rawlings? Okay. Does that make any difference to you? It's real. It's just this. It's the same thing. Jersey's a jersey, and the lettering and the number. I don't think that was for the statement of jersey's a jersey.
And I certainly know it's not for the shirt that Nick is wearing.
A little bit about the shirt that I'm wearing. If you've been part of the panel in the past, I try to wear the most ridiculous thing I can find in my closet. This is a style that the Mets AAA team wore this past year. I don't think it's returning, but I had to grab mine while it lasted.
Now, that jersey is, as you can see, it's not sewn. The graphics are printed right on it. It's a process called sublimation. Russ really doesn't like that style because it would put him out of business. You can't have a shop called Stitches if there's nothing to stitch. But we were talking about it, Russ and I, beforehand, and really the problem with sublimation, and it was used, it's never, I don't think there's ever been a sublimated Major League Baseball uniform.
Turn ahead the clock.
Oh, the turn ahead the clock was sublimated. Okay, good, excellent point. NHL and NBA uniforms, they have dabbled with sublimation. And the problem always, including with the turn ahead the clock, is that it makes too much possible. It basically, you can do anything you want, and it becomes what I call because you can design. And you can do anything with sublimation, and nobody seems to know where there are any boundaries or borders, and you know, if they can, they do, and usually they shouldn't have.
And that's why I wore the jersey, because I can. So, at the end of '86, the Mets did something a little bit different with the lettering on their jerseys, which most people mistakenly assume started in '87. It's this dazzle print on the letters and the numbers. So the team logo went to a very, very shiny type of a font. But this actually started in the postseason 1986. And what few people know, because these jerseys very, very seldomly come to second market for sale, is that any postseason 1986 jersey worn in the playoffs and ultimately in the World Series championship had this style letters, unlike the jerseys worn during the regular season '86.
Now there was another thing that's not jersey related. Does anyone know another difference that happened in the World Series uniforms versus the regular season uniforms in '86? I believe that the Mets had green underbrims, green underbrims on their caps in the regular season, and switched to gray just for the World Series. And this is something I've had arguments with people over, because they went, Russ, I believe they went with gray for the throwback caps this past season. The gray underbrims. Russ, come on, I expect you to know this stuff.
No, I don't know. I don't do anything with the hats.
No? All right. All right, we want to get to Q&A pretty soon, so can we try to bring this home?
Okay, I'll shorten the rest of the presentation. I know we touched on the blue alternates a little earlier, but I have a couple of examples of the very, very early blue alternates that the Mets wore. They wore these in 1982, 3, and 4. And literally, they hadn't worn them for nearly 30 years before they revived them at the expense of the black jersey, which I think this crowd isn't very much in favor of, but we kind of liked them about 15 years ago. So the first jersey, worn by a gentleman whose name came up in previous discussion today, ironically, Pat Zachary. This was worn in '82, and it was the only time in Mets history that they had blue trim with orange on the sleeves and the necklines. So this was worn as a road alternate in '82. It lasted for one single year. It was replaced by a home and road alternate. This is the home, and unlike the batting practice jersey of the time, it was made of actual poly material, not mesh. The lettering, unlike the batting practice as well, was orange with a gray border, whereas the batting practices had the white border. These also had neckline tagging, set tagging, player tagging, and names on the backs. This was the home version.
and here's the road version. Now, these jerseys lasted for 2 years before they basically went away until roughly 2011-12. As a little trivia question, yell out if you know who wore this jersey.
What number is it?
You got it, Ron Darling. Ron Darling, John would probably be able to tell you best, wore a lot of different numbers for the Mets. First of them being?
3 numbers, yeah. So 44 was his first one. He moved to 12 and then later to 15.
All right, I've just been informed we have 5 minutes, so I want to turn it over to Q&A to the audience. Thanks to Nick for sharing his extraordinary collection.
Thank you.
Gentleman here.
All right, this question is for Russ. This is probably a little nitpicking even for a uniform panel. So notice when a new player is acquired or called up, the name is arched a little more than people who've been on the team the entire season. Do those come from Majestic and then you do the arches? Or?
Really good. I'm going to tell you why. I can tell if Majestic does it or I do it because I arch it more, very slightly, and that is really good.
I feel like 2 years ago, Hansel Robles, his was like you could tell the difference between 2015 and 2016.
The way Majestic, sometimes it looks straight. The way Majestic does it.
That's the first set they issue. Comes straight from Majestic.
The first set is Majestic, and yeah, that's really good.
This gentleman here.
And I have a question for you afterwards.
Question for Russ. I've been to spring training a couple of times. Are you involved with all those jerseys that they hand out to all the, I don't want to say no-name players, but unknown players, the names, and it's like crazy. Do you get involved?
You mean like the T-shirts?
No, the uniforms.
Just because there's so many guys invited to spring training. All the
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay. Then some of them don't even have names on there. I mean,
some just don't get them. I do it for the minor leagues too.
Gotcha.
Who else has a question? Question.
What was your interaction with Charlie Samuels? I mean, everything that went down with him.
It's a long story. Me and
For those who
Charlie-
aren't aware, Charlie Samuels got into some legal difficulties regarding game used or possibly not game used jerseys.
There's a lot more than that. But bottom line, the bottom line is there was a period of time where I was sort of like guilty by association. But after all the years went by, me and Jeff Wilpon talked. I approached him about certain things, and he said, "Russ, look, the fact that you're still with us shows that we did our background search on you and you weren't involved in anything," and I wasn't. I'll just leave it at that. I mean, Charlie's not in a good place right now.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I asked this question in a previous QBC, and I'm curious if you could change one thing to the Mets uniform set or one thing to the hat, uniform, whatever. What would one or a few of you change?
I'd change the orange squatchy back to blue, personally. Anybody else?
Most people, it seems like we've done this a couple times. Most people like the traditional, keep everything like that. But the way the world is now, you make the one change, like Paul said, they're going to take away on the blue shirt this year. They're going to take away the Mr. Met and put back the old patch. Who's going to buy a new jersey? A lot of people will. That's what it's all about, selling more jerseys.
Just as an aside, the gentleman who just asked that question, he is wearing the new home alternate cap, which I am now holding. So as you can see, it has the white outlined logo, but the blue brim rather than the orange brim. We were looking for one earlier. No one in the room had one.
Let's ask Mr. Met about how he feels.
So they just started selling them, I think, this week. So,
Let's ask Mr. Met about it.
anybody else have any other changes they would make? Any other questions?
I can talk to Russ all day.
Yeah, any other questions for anyone other than Russ?
Get good answers.
For the trivia guy over there, the numbers guy.
Yeah.
What's the lowest number that a Met player never wore?
Lowest number that's never been issued. The lowest number that's never been issued
by a Met player.
Would be 37 for
You got it. Casey Stengel, who wasn't a player.
You thought, with your primitive questions, you thought. All right, I've been told we have to clear out, so I want to thank everybody in the room. I want to thank my fantastic panelists. And let's go Mets.